it's very, very hard to tell at this early stage whether this is the kind of thing that is going to turn him into a martyr and bring people out on the streets. I have a suspicion that probably not, given the degree to which this is a very brutal authoritarianism at the moment. But nonetheless, there's no one who will not think that directly or indirectly Putin killed Navalny.
Well, that
And I think that is something that we're going to have hanging around Putin's neck for the rest of his life.
Я все приседаю, думаю, что лба у него больше, тогда появится на картинке.
это не так.
А оно не работает.
Ты мне не мешаешь.
Today's top story on the Times Radio midday update. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has died in prison. That's according to the Russian prison service. The 47-year-old had been one of Vladimir Putin's strongest critics and was serving a 19-year jail term in the country's Arctic region. I'm joined now by Professor Mark Galeotti, an expert in Russia, a senior fellow with the Rusi think tank and an honorary professor at University College London. Professor Galeotti, welcome.
Hello there.
Why was Alexei Navalny such a significant figure, and what does his death mean for a Russia at war?
And two reasons why he was so significant. One was that he had this extraordinary capability to reach out beyond the usual opposition circles. And what really made him dangerous, and why the state truly went after him, is precisely when he was starting to reach out and more or less try and form a kind of coalition of the fed up. So it didn't matter if you're a factory worker who was just unhappy because you couldn't make ends meet, or whether you were some kind of liberal middle class intellectual or whatever. The idea was to bring that alliance together. That's what made him dangerous. And that was because of his charisma, his organizing capacity, and so forth. The other thing about what made him so dangerous was precisely that he went back. Putin tried to, well, his agents essentially poisoned him. Navalny was able to get medical treatment in Germany. And he could have stayed out there. He could have been a sort of the kind of opposition figure who stays in a nice sort of cozy berth in the West while complaining about what's going on in Russia. But he went back to continue to have skin in the game, and that kind of kept him relevant. Now, look, it's very, very hard to tell at this early stage whether this is the kind of thing that is going to turn him into a martyr and bring people out on the streets. I have a suspicion that probably not, given the degree to which this is a very brutal authoritarianism at the moment. But nonetheless, there's no one who will not think that directly or indirectly Putin killed Navalny. And I think that is something that we're going to have hanging around Putin's neck for the rest of his life.
Well, that's exactly what we're hearing from the president of Latvia, one of the first world leaders to respond publicly to the news. He said Navalny had been brutally murdered by the Kremlin. Dmitry Muratov, the Russian journalist and Nobel Peace Prize winner, said Navalny's death, if confirmed, and it's worth pointing out that Navalny's team, his lawyer, his press secretary have not been told of his death, even if President Putin has. They said, Dmitry Muratov, the Russian journalist and Nobel laureate, says the death was murder. I believe prison conditions led to his death. As you said, directly or indirectly, Mark Galeotti, even if it was just a case, that's not meant to sound flippant, but even if it was, simply a case of being imprisoned in -30 conditions in the Arctic Circle, as Navalny was, he told his followers about those conditions fairly recently. That may well have been the thing that did for him, just the brutal conditions he was imprisoned in that penal colony in the Arctic Circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just that he was in what's called a harsh regime colony. It's also that clearly he was being singled out for all kinds of petty and not so petty measures. Sleep deprivation, being put in solitary, that kind of thing. So absolutely. I mean, again, we don't yet know any of the details, but nonetheless, if it is as it sounds, like medical issue, how far it's precisely because of the fact that Putin had really seen Navalny driven right up to the wall, so that he probably wasn't in a fit state to actually be able to cope with those conditions.
And I guess the question, as you said, is whether this is an affirmation of Putin's authority, i.e. he's so powerful he can kill the most charismatic, high-profile opposition figure, not having to fear popular unrest, or whether Putin is overstepping the mark. And you suspect, Professor Galeotti, that Putin's power is so absolute over Russia. That's what David Petraeus said to us earlier. His authority is so absolute that he can probably do this and terrify the population into submission.
See, I'd actually flip that round. Personally, I mean, I think that Putin was at his strongest when he didn't need to be killing people. When exactly his power was so unquestionable that everyone knew the situation. And we saw this also when he murdered his mercenary commander, Yevgeny Prigozhin, last year. Again, that actually, although on one level it looks as if it's affirming Putin's strength, his capacity to reach out and kill anyone he wants, on another one, and certainly within the Russian elite, it's actually an expression of Putin's weakness, that he feared first Prigozhin and now Navalny so much that he actually had to kill them. That, for me, is not only a sign of a shift from a kind of hybrid authoritarianism to a full-blown totalitarianism, but also a sign that the aging Putin is not as confident as he would like to make out.
Yeah, an expression of paranoia, perhaps. Well, Professor Mark Galeotti, expert in Russia from the Rusi think tank, thanks very much for joining us here on Times Radio.